I find it much easier to write narrative than to write discursive or analytic prose. I mean, I don't mind sitting down to write a sort of little narrative piece, but every non-narrative piece that I've written, I've sweated blood over it and sort of hated doing it and so on. And my husband, Hamu, used to have a thing about me always beginning any article with there was this little car or there was this little anything, and having to move on from there and then eventually take away that first paragraph. On the other hand, of course, journalism is such an immediate response to things that are going on that, and I mean, for the last several years, it has seemed that things that are going on can't wait for a fictional response, even if you could command fiction in that sort of way, but that if you had a platform, if you had a newspaper that was willing to publish you and readers who were willing to read you, then you should get out there and say what you thought needed to be said as quickly as possible and as immediately as possible. Hence Metzger and all the journalism that's been happening for the last several years, even though it is so much more difficult for me than fiction.
What was the effect on your life of The Guardian sending you to Palestine?
It stopped me writing the next novel, as Nigel and everybody from Bloomsbury. This is, yes, I'm so sorry. I pocketed the advance long ago and spent it.
But spent it wisely and well.
Yeah. No, it was really, I mean, it was quite remarkable when they said, would you go? This was just at the first Intifada had started. And this was the sort of November 2000, and they said, would you like to go to the West Bank and write about the situation? And I just said yes without a second's hesitation. I sort of got scared later on and so on. But
how often had you been before?
I had never been. I'd never been before. It was very, very much my first time. And it was such an incredible experience. And the fact that, I mean, in terms of the experience itself, it was really the first time ever. I decided that while I was there, I was going to write in diary form. So I'd go through the day, and then I would sit up at night, and I would write everything that happened. And it was the first time ever that while working, while writing, I never had to bring my mind back and force it to concentrate on the business at hand. It was just focused. And I felt that I was doing, also I sort of, like there wasn't that question, is what you're doing worth doing, which is kind of always there in the back of your mind. So it was an incredible experience. And then the fact that The Guardian published it and published it very strongly, and the response that it got and so on, it just, it sort of also pushed me into a place where after that it was sort of wrong not to.
It politicized you.
Well, I was always politicized, but it gave me a platform.
But I mean in a public way.
In a public way, exactly.
There was a point at which you became an important voice in a situation.
There was a point at which I became somebody who could write and be published about this issue.
And importantly published in the West.
That's tremendously important because, of course, I mean, there are many people who do what I do in Arabic and you know, are published and everything. But there were not that many voices in English. And so for my voice to have a platform, to have a place where it would be heard from in Western newspapers, and also, of course, you do something in The Guardian and other papers pick it up in Spain, in Italy, in France, and so on. So it becomes a responsibility. So, you know, without being sort of megalomaniac, I mean, I should say, of course, that I am completely aware that everything has become so much worse in this last decade since I started writing. So I can't kid myself that it actually makes any difference. But it is still a responsibility, so that when something really bad happens or whatever, you just feel, I should say something.
Has it stopped you writing the novel because you haven't had time, or because you're emotionally refocused, or because it has made you question the value of writing fiction?
No, it hasn't. I mean, the last one, definitely not. Because, in fact, the more you engage directly with the day-to-day and with politics, in journalism or activism or whatever, the more you see that you can do, that art can do what all this can't do. And so there is no question in my mind of the value of fiction or any other art form that people do. No, it's really been a question. It's been a combination of the first two factors. It's essentially been a question of time. But it doesn't mean that every single minute has been taken up. It means that if you've just done something in terms of something to do with activism or journalism or whatever, and you're going to do something next week, then the days in between are no good for writing fiction. In other words, in order to, especially with a novel, I don't know, maybe poetry is different, or because it's shorter, but with a novel, it's such a big project that I have found that I take a long time to sort of run at it, as it were. And once started, then I really need to carry on every day, and it needs to take possession of my head. It can't sort of, I mean, you can do things like put the laundry in the washing machine and pay the bills, but you can't actually really engage intellectually and emotionally with something else. So,
can I ask about another piece of activism? Because we have spoken in the Alhambra Palace, we've spoken in a muddy field in Wales, and you have heroically arranged for the last couple of years for a literature festival that tours Palestine, primarily introducing Western, European, African writers to the country, and partly engaging with local writers. This is a huge diversionary tactic from getting down to write your novel, obviously. But what have you found that your Western colleagues have discovered? And what was the level of revelation for them in being there?
It was massive. I mean, and that really was why, I mean, there were two strands to my thinking, me and my friends who did this, who set this up. One was that we very much felt that Palestinian society was a society under siege, and that, I mean, it needs people to visit. It needs sort of fresh blood. It needs to feel part of the, the world. And therefore visiting and sort of setting up events and taking people is very welcome. But also, there's nothing like being there to actually understand what's happening. And no amount of representation, really. I mean, this time, for example, one of the authors, I'm not going to say who it is, but one of the authors who was with us actually broke down in tears at one point and saying, how did I ever think that I knew? I thought I knew, but I didn't. And that really is a key thing. I'm not going to do a whole, this is a, but if I could just very briefly, we've just finished the report on this last festival. And, well, on the last one, for example, Andrew O'Hagan, one night,